Hi, welcome to ETP6001 Assessment 1 Creative Works. I'd like to talk to you today about reading fluency. So what is reading fluency? Well, let's have a look. I think if we start on reading with fluency and what the research currently tells us, we'll go through an introduction and a rationale for why we want to look at reading fluency from a research perspective, the different research design and methodology that I've considered, the data collection and analysis that will be done, as well as any findings or expected findings and the potential implications of those findings. Reading fluency forms an important part of a primary school education, particularly in the literacy, but I think it helps to underpin some of our other subjects such as STEM and inquiry and science if we've got a solid understanding of fluent reading. It can be defined in two different ways: qualitative, or the use of rhythm and phrasing and the alternation of one's voice to convey the character's feelings or expressions, and the quantitative side of it, that is accuracy or words counted per minute, accurate words versus errors, and we can split it quite nicely that way. I think the quality and or efficiency are the best indicators for fluent reading, but I also think it's worth noting that the sooner those decoding skills become automatic, the sooner students are able to extract meaning and comprehension from the text that they're reading. And so that largely underpins why we would focus on fluency. Early readers do spend a lot of their attention and effort decoding and deciphering words, and often that means they won't extract the meaning or be able to comprehend the text as well at an early level. In my experience in lower grades in primary schools, there is an effort on the phonemes or phonemic awareness, and I was curious to know when that focus would shift to a more fluent form of reading. And whilst fluency on its own doesn't necessarily result in good comprehension, it certainly allows students to improve that with repetition, in some instances at a lower instructional level, so by creating words or using words that are more familiar to them. The work of Rosinski and Samuels in this field is certainly something that has come through when you start looking into the research. And so Rosinski, this graphic on the left, talks about moving students and creating a bridge for students to get from that decoding and deciphering to using prosody or rhythm and tone when they read, to vary their voice and express what's happening using the grammar and the punctuation that exists around those words. And I think if we plug it into that Luke and Freebody 4-resource model, it's about moving our students out of that decoding stage into becoming text participants more quickly, so that they can extract that meaning and understand written and visual texts earlier in their reading journey. So how does fluency relate to other areas of literacy? So we've talked about the phonics or the phonological awareness, and the fact that well-timed decoding of unfamiliar words helps to increase the fluency of reading. I think it's important that we point out that fluency isn't just about reading fast. It's about using the grammar and the punctuation to intonate exactly what's happening in the text. But I also think that it leads to an increase in vocabulary knowledge and increasing awareness of sentence structure and punctuation, and how that improves both the experience of the reader and those listening to the reading, but also how it can improve your writing and your ability for speaking and listening. And obviously the aforementioned comprehension skills that it aids. So my research design question ultimately became how voice recordings and self-assessment help young readers improve fluency and confidence. I considered some other research questions in consultation with my mentor, and ultimately we had to tweak the research design, or we will have to tweak the research design using the same question based on the move out of face-to-face learning into remote learning. But it's a feasible study that we think we should be able to collect some data for. So we're using a qualitative research design as appropriate for education research to investigate the impact of self-assessment on reading fluency. Ideally conducted in a mainstream classroom setting when reading groups were ordinarily scheduled, and the teacher research role obviously is unique to educational research in a way, because it allows me as the teacher and the researcher to reflect on my practice and try and maximise the benefit for my students. And having read some of the data published in this space, it was suggested that a book one level below current instructional level would be selected because the focus of the study is on fluency, and we don't want our students labouring on decoding every single word. So every student was to record themselves reading their text, and then again on a Monday, and then again on a Friday. Ideally, we would have done this in the first week of placement, and then again in the last week, having focused on some emphasis on clear and confident voices. The PM Reading app on the iPad, so introducing some technology that has a voice recording capacity with some guidance from a teacher, as well as these rubrics on the right-hand side. We would collect some data to be able to analyse and give us some awareness of what, if any, improvements the students might be able to make. The teacher, and me as the teacher researcher, keeping a research journal to record any observations, to reflect on some questions and answers that we would have immediately following the recording and having listened to the recording. And so the rubrics focus on phrasing and on expression. So two kind of key factors that influence fluency in reading. Leaving to one side the quantitative accuracy and word count per minute being beyond the scope of the study. And aware that the students have been undergoing some instruction around their fluency and speaking with clear and confident voices when speaking and listening, we want to carry that across into their reading. Students recorded their voice, and we collect some data around some key questions that we wanted to ask them after they'd listened to their recording. What did they notice about their reading fluency, and what they thought they needed to work on to improve their fluency, and whether or not we could establish some goals for them to work towards. Student responses recorded in a journal in an attempt to extract some common themes so that we could talk about what were the key things that they thought a fluent reader could do. In terms of limitations of a study like this, obviously the time frame was reduced, first of all because of a 4-week placement block, and then fundamentally by the move into remote learning as opposed to face-to-face learning. I noted and have pointed out that the word count per minute is something that is considered when we talk about fluency, but was probably excluded as a variable for this based on the sort of qualitative nature of the study that we wanted to do. A relatively small sample size, so with a class size of only 17 and not all being able to or not all being able to be assessed because some had opted out, as well as a tendency to not necessarily be present for all of the remote learning. There's a natural drop-off when you move to remote learning, that students are filtered out by technology and access to technology, etc. And I think there would be capacity to collect more data with a bigger research team. But I also think that results would be consistent with those expected in a classroom with a solo teacher and being able to record relatively infrequently, or at least enable students to record themselves and reflect on their own performance, allows that data to be quite applicable to a modern classroom. Expected findings, potential implications, and room for further research. It's expected that by having students analyse their own reading recordings, you might see an increase in motivation, as well as an increase and an improvement in their fluency. There's capacity for some students who see themselves as less confident or less accomplished readers to rate themselves low, both pre and post, which has a potential to skew the data, I suppose. I think the implications are that voice recordings and technology allow us to be paired with some self-assessment and be used as a viable option for teachers in their classrooms. I think there's capacity to sort of cross-check, if you like, the data that you find in your recordings against your running records and see if there's a common error that needs a little bit more work in their phonics or in their sentence structure and their understanding of sentence structure, that kind of thing. But I also think this has some application in remote learning where students are able to record themselves and upload it so that the teacher can give some feedback consistently. And I noted that further research on an older cohort or a bigger sample size would be useful, and even on different types of texts. So the Fontes and Pinnell books were the books that we would be favouring at Prep 1 level. I wonder whether using information texts and a variety of texts might yield a slightly different result. So how to implement this type of thing in a classroom, or how I see it working in a classroom using that Lamar instructional framework, we're clearly stating a goal to improve our reading fluency as learning intentions and success criteria. I've got a YouTube resource there that particularly at Prep 1 level puts it into a terminology that helps them understand what reading like a robot looks like, and reading one word at a time, etc. And a move towards more fluent and expressive reading so that they can understand what exactly fluent reading looks like. And then the activity is essentially extrapolated out into a group setting where they take it in turns to record themselves, having had some time to practice, and they assess themselves. I don't think this necessarily has a role for peer assessment, but I think there's potential for that. And then I would also open it up to a reflection and sharing opportunity for students as well, where they can share their own voice recordings and see if they'd like some feedback on how they thought they went and whether or not they assess themselves similar to what other people would. And thank you very much. My references are included at the end there as well.